Rena Mott drove the shovel into the dead red earth, and what happened next would cost 5 riders everything they thought they owned. She did not cry. Not once. She had already given Caleb every tear her body could make, and now she had nothing left but the handle in her fists and the hard ground, refusing to give way, and 5 men watching her from the ridge above the Cimarron, watching her the way wolves watch a deer that has stopped running. What those 5 riders did not know was that the dust-gray man coming up the trail from the south was Owen Mott, Caleb's older brother, and his name had once been Smoke, and 3 territories had a price on him before he was 30. Folks, this is the story of Rena Mott, of the Cimarron Strip in the spring of 1884, and of a debt one quiet man had buried for 12 years before 5 wrong riders dug it back up. If you ride with stories like this, tap that subscribe button right now. Drop your city in the comments and tell me what time it is where you are tonight. Pour yourself something warm. Lean a little closer. Now let's go back. Back to the morning Caleb Mott was carried home across a saddle. Back to before Rena knew the word widow, and before the wrong men sat their horses on her ridge. The Cimarron Strip in 1884 was not a place that rewarded the weak, the unlucky, or the slow. It was a hard, thin shelf of land between Kansas to the north and the Cherokee Outlet to the south, and in a dry spring it turned to alkali dust, so fine it crept under locked doors and laid itself like gray powder on everything you had ever loved. The ranchers and the cattlemen and the big outfit operators who ran their herds across it knew only 2 things with certainty. Water was life, and life was scarce. There was one exception on that stretch of the Cimarron. One small, remarkable exception, the Mott claim. 320 acres of grassland running south from a limestone bluff, and at its center, the only live spring in 80 miles. In a dry year, that spring meant survival. For the 6 big outfits who ran cattle through the strip, that spring was not a convenience. It was the difference between a profitable drive and a catastrophic one. And the man who had filed on the land and dug the well house and registered the water rights was a young homesteader named Caleb Mott, 26 years old, quiet as a church and stubborn as good iron. For 3 years, Caleb Mott had managed to hold his claim against pressure from every direction. He sold water access at fair prices. He extended credit to small ranchers when the big outfits squeezed them, and he kept his ledger in a locked tin box under the kitchen floor. That ledger, it turned out, contained something that a man named Augustus Pell could not allow to exist. Rena Mott had met Caleb in a dry goods store in Caldwell when she was 19 years old, and she had married him 6 weeks later, which was fast even by frontier standards. But there was something about Caleb Mott that made a person want to get settled quickly, as if time spent waiting might let him slip away. He was not large, not loud. He laughed at things other men did not notice. He woke before sunrise and stood at the kitchen door drinking his coffee and looking at the prairie, and Ren had spent 2 years learning to stand there beside him and understand what he was looking at. By the spring of 1884, they had been married 3 years and were 2 months from expecting their first child. On a Thursday in March, a man named Hep Burdine rode out from the freight office in Coldwater with a message from Augustus Pell. The message was simple and politely worded, and amounted to an offer to buy the water rights to the Mott Spring for $400, a fair sum by anyone's calculation. Caleb read the message at supper, folded it in half, and set it beside his coffee cup. "Tell Mr. Pell no," he said. 2 weeks after that, Caleb Mott was dead. They said it was a riding accident. One of Pell's hands, a man named Crow Ashworth, brought the body home across a saddle and stood in Rena's yard with his hat in his hand and a soft, almost gentle expression on his face. And he said that Caleb's horse had stumbled on the eastern slope near the creek crossing, and Caleb had been thrown, and it had been very quick, and he was very sorry. He said all of this with his pale eyes resting just past her shoulder. Rena stood in her doorway and looked at her husband's hands. Caleb's hands were calloused along the reins lines on the palm, with a small white scar across the right thumb where he had caught a rusted wire 3 years back. She knew those hands. They were the hands of a man who had ridden horses his whole life. Caleb Mott did not fall off horses. She buried him herself, mostly, with some help from her nearest neighbor, a widow woman named May Tully, who lived 3 miles south, and who came when she heard and said very little, and handed her food she couldn't eat. The ground was hard, the sun was merciless, and on the 3rd day, 5 men sat their horses on the ridge above her ranch and watched. Augustus Pell was not from the West. He was from Philadelphia originally, though he had spent enough years in Kansas City that he had learned to wear the right clothes and speak the right cadences. He was 51 years old, trim and precise, with the careful manners of a man who had spent a long time convincing other men he was reasonable. He kept china plates in his freight office in Coldwater and ate supper off them with silver-handled cutlery. He read chapters of the Bible aloud to his men each morning before they rode, his voice measured and unhurried. The same voice he used to foreclose on a small rancher or order a fence line cut in the dark. He owned 4 cattle companies, a freight operation, and enough political debt to keep 3 county sheriffs looking at the floor when he needed them to. What Augustus Pell wanted from Rena Mott was the water rights ledger, not the land. The ledger specifically, because the ledger contained a record of every arrangement Caleb had made with the small ranchers of the Strip, and several of those arrangements were proof of things Augustus Pell had done that the territorial marshal would have found very interesting. His ramrod was a man named Crow Ashworth. Crow Ashworth was perhaps 35, lean and light in the saddle, with a soft voice he never raised above a conversational murmur. He was clean-shaven always, which was unusual on the frontier and had the effect of making him look younger than he was, and less dangerous than he was. He smiled when he delivered bad news. He had been with Pell for 6 years and had handled 11 situations that required handling. He was good at it, and quick, and when he was done with a job, he went back to his bunkhouse and read dime novels by lamplight, as if nothing had happened. The 2 men Crow most often worked with were the Henry brothers. Their given names were Edmund and Ira, but nobody used them. People called them the Henrys, or sometimes just the twins. They were identical in the way that only twins born mean can be identical, matching each other move for move without speaking, as if they had one nervous system split between 2 bodies. They never spoke above a whisper between themselves. They wore their pistols on the left hip, both of them, and drew with the right hand, and in 6 years no one had successfully argued with them about it. These were the men Augustus Pell sent to the Mott Ridge to watch Rena Mott bury her husband. On the 4th day after the funeral, Crow Ashworth rode down to the ranch house alone. He tied his horse at the post, removed his hat, and knocked on the door. Rena opened it. She had a flour sack in one hand and nothing in the other, and she looked at him for a long moment before she said anything. "My husband is 4 days in the ground," she said. "Yes, ma'am," Crow said, with that soft voice and that patient expression. "And I am sorry for that, truly, but Mr. Pell would like to know if you've had time to reconsider his offer." "I've had time," Rena said. "The answer is still no." Crow put his hat back on. He smiled just barely. Patient, the way a man smiles when he already knows how something ends. "Well," he said, "you take a few more days. There's no rush." He paused at the gatepost. "Spring is a hard time to be alone out here, ma'am. Terrible things can happen to a woman alone on a ranch this size." He rode back up the ridge without looking back. The man who arrived at Rena Mott's door on the evening of the 5th day was not expected and not announced. He simply appeared at the yard gate in the last hour of daylight, sitting a gray horse that was as road-worn as he was. He was perhaps 45, tall in the saddle but carrying it quietly, as if he had been still for so long that stillness had grown into the shape of him. He wore a plain coat, dust-colored, and a hat that had started dark and faded to the color of old wood. He had a week's growth of beard and eyes that were a flat, careful gray. Rena came to the door with a shotgun and said, "Who are you?" "Owen Mott," the man said. "Caleb's brother." She looked at him for a long time. She had known Caleb had a brother somewhere west. He had mentioned him 3 or 4 times, always briefly, always with a slight hesitation, the way you mention something complicated, that you don't quite know how to explain. She had not expected Owen Mott to look like this. She had expected someone who looked like Caleb. Owen did not look like Caleb. He looked like what Caleb might have become if Caleb had spent 12 years walking through something very hard. "He wrote me your name," Owen said. "Last winter, I didn't answer fast enough. He came inside and ate nothing. He sat beside Caleb's coffin, which had not yet been taken to the churchyard, and he stayed there the whole night." Rena woke twice in the dark and looked through the doorway, and he was still there, still, not praying that she could see, just present, as if presence was the only thing left in his vocabulary. In the morning he helped her carry the coffin to the wagon and drive it to the churchyard, and he helped dig the second grave, and he stood with his hat in his hands while the circuit preacher read the words. He did not weep. Rena did not weep. They stood side by side in the cold blue Cimarron morning and said goodbye to Caleb Mott together, and by the time they drove back to the ranch, they understood each other well enough to work in silence. It was on the second evening after supper that Rena said to Owen, "I know they killed him." Owen looked at the table. "I know Caleb didn't fall," she said. "He didn't fall off horses. Not ever." "No," Owen said, "he didn't." "Do you know who? Man named Ashworth does what a man named Pell tells him to do." He said it flat, without emphasis, as if he had already worked through whatever he needed to work through to say it that way. "The water rights ledger," Rena said. "That's what they want. Caleb told me once there were things in it that would ruin a man if they came out. Then we need to find it before they do." Rena stood, went to the kitchen, and came back with a key. "He told me this was for something in the smokehouse," she said. "Said if anything ever happened to him, the most important thing was the smokehouse floor." Owen took the key and turned it in his fingers once. "Where's Pell run his operation?" "Coldwater, freight office and stockyards." Owen set the key on the table. "I'll go into town in the morning. I want to see what we're dealing with." Rena looked at him. "Owen, I don't know what kind of man you've been these last 12 years. Caleb never told me much, but I know what Crow Ashworth is. I know what the Henry brothers are. If you ride into Coldwater and ask the wrong questions, they will kill you the same way they killed Caleb." Owen was quiet for a moment. "They might try," he said. He rode into Coldwater the next morning and did 3 things. He bought tobacco at the general store. He stood at the bar in the White Dog Saloon for 20 minutes, nursing a whiskey he didn't drink. And he rode past the Pell freight office on his way out and looked at it the way a man looks at a building he is measuring. On his way back through the door of the saloon, a man grabbed his arm. The man was old, 60 at least, with a freighter's thick hands and the kind of face the frontier makes out of weather and whiskey over 40 years. His name was Hep Burdine. He had been watching Owen from the moment he walked in. "Son," Hep Burdine said very quietly, "you want to step outside with me a minute?" They went around the side of the building into the alley between the saloon and the feed store. Hep Burdine looked both ways, which struck Owen as more dramatic than necessary, and then he took hold of Owen's coat lapel with one big fist and looked him directly in the face, from about 8 inches away. "Christ above," he said in a whisper. "That's not Owen Mott. I know Owen Mott." Owen Mott was a kid who ran horses for the Tucker spread in '69 and couldn't throw a punch to save his life. He shook his head. "That's not what you are now." Owen waited. "I had your picture nailed up in my freight office for 3 years, Burdine said. "Kansas, Missouri, and I think they had you in the Colorado Territory too for a while. Smoke Mott, that was the name they had on the paper." He let go of the lapel. "You're him. Don't bother telling me you're not." Owen looked at the alley wall for a long moment. "Whatever you think you know," he said. "There was a Lawrence Line train robbery in '73. 6 men. I wasn't one of them. I was a witness, and they needed someone who couldn't afford a lawyer." "I don't care about that," Burdine said. "I care about why you're here." He looked toward the freight office down the street. "Is it Caleb?" "Yes." Burdine was quiet for a while. He pulled a tobacco pouch from his coat and worked at it with unsteady hands. "I knew Pell had that boy killed," he said, finally. "I knew it the day Crow Ashworth rode back in here looking like he'd had a fine morning. I couldn't prove it. I can't prove it." He glanced at Owen. "I heard about you, back when your name was Smoke. Heard you were fair. Heard you never shot a man who hadn't already decided to shoot you first." "Most of that's right," Owen said. "You go up against Crow Ashworth and the Henry brothers, there's going to be shooting." Burdine said it like a fact, not a warning. "Most likely. Those boys are not slow, I know." Owen took the unlit tobacco pouch back toward the saloon door. "Neither am I just haven't had to be in 12 years. Now, friends, I want to stop here for just a moment. If you've been riding with us this far, I want you to do one thing right now. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. Tell me where you're listening from tonight. What time is it where you are? Is it late? Are you driving? Whatever city, whatever hour, I want to know. Your comments are what keep these stories moving. Now let's get back to the Cimarron Strip, because Owen Mott just found out what he's really riding into. Owen rode back to the Mott ranch in the long afternoon light and sat with Rena at the kitchen table and told her, mostly, what Hep Burdine had said. Not all of it. He told her about the name Smoke. He told her about the Lawrence train robbery he hadn't committed. He told her about the 12 years of riding under a name that wasn't his, and about the woman he had married in '77, a schoolteacher from Wichita named Clara, and about how she had asked him one night over supper to bury the gun and live like a regular man, and about how he had done it because he loved her, and about how she had died of fever the following January, with the gun still in the trunk and him sitting on the floor beside her bed holding her hand. "I haven't fired a pistol since the day she asked me to put it away," Owen said. 12 years. Rena looked at him steadily. "Are you telling me that so I don't count on you?" "I'm telling you so you know what you've got. You rode 300 miles to sit beside your brother's coffin," Rena said. "You helped me dig a grave in hard ground without being asked." And Hep Burdine, who has seen everything in 40 years of freighting, went white just from looking at your face. Owen said nothing. "Do you remember how?" she asked. He was quiet long enough that the fire crackled twice. "Yes," he said, "I remember how. That night they went to the Smokehouse. It had been a dry spring, and the building smelled of old wood and the ghost of dried beef and the kind of thick, settled quiet that gathers in a place nobody has opened in a while. Owen took a lantern. They went to the back wall, and Owen found the loose board that the key had told him to find, and beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with twine, was Caleb Mott's ledger. It was 83 pages of Caleb's careful, close handwriting. They brought it to the kitchen table, and Owen read it while Rena made coffee, and the more he read, the more still he became, that slow quieting a man goes through when something has already been decided, and he is just now catching up to it. The ledger contained the water rights agreements, as expected. It also contained something else entirely. It contained a record, in Caleb's precise hand, of 6 instances where Augustus Pell had used the water rights access as leverage to coerce small ranchers into selling at below market prices, and a 7th entry dated 10 days before Caleb's death that read, "Pell's man Crow Ashworth came again today. He said the arrangement required confidentiality or arrangements might change. I told him I am not a man who changes arrangements under a threat. I believe he will come back." Owen closed the ledger. He sat with his hands flat on the table for a while. "There's enough here to hang Pell," he said. "If it gets to the territorial marshal, if Pell doesn't get to the marshal first. How far is the marshal's office?" "Fort Supply." 2 days' ride. Rena was quiet, thinking. "Crow Ashworth has been watching this place. If we try to ride with that ledger, they'll follow." "Yes. So we need them to come here first." Owen looked at her. "They're going to come regardless," Rena said. "You know that. You ride into Coldwater, Burdine sees your face and goes white. Crow Ashworth's men are watching everything. By tomorrow evening they'll know you're here. They'll know someone is here who isn't going to sell." She straightened. "So let them come here. Let us choose the ground." Owen looked at his sister-in-law for a long moment. She was 24 years old, 2 months a widow, and she was sitting at a kitchen table in the Cimarron Strip in the dark, talking about choosing ground for a fight. He thought about Caleb, about the letters he had gotten over the years, and never answered quickly enough. And he thought about the woman Caleb had described in those letters, steady and practical and bright. "He said you were the best thing he'd ever done," Owen said. He was right. They spent 2 days preparing. Owen walked every inch of the property the first morning, moving through it the way he had learned to move through land a long time ago, reading it the way other men read books. He spent an hour at the dry wash that ran along the south property line, studying the angle of approach and the width of the channel, and the way a horse would have to slow to descend into it and climb back out. He walked the distance to the bunkhouse, a small empty structure 30 yards from the main house that Caleb had built for the ranch hand he had meant to hire but never gotten around to hiring. He spent a long time looking at where the bunkhouse stood relative to the house and relative to the wash. On the second morning, he drove the wagon to Coldwater, bought what he needed from the hardware store, paid for it with his own money, and drove back in the afternoon. He did not look at the Pell freight office. He did not need to. That afternoon, he strung a length of heavy-gauge steel wire between 2 mesquite posts at the lip of the dry wash, low to the ground, 6 inches above the dirt. A horse coming down into the wash at any pace faster than a careful walk would not see it until the last stride, and by then it would be too late. He wrapped the wire ends with canvas so the metal would not catch the moonlight. He built a fire set in the bunkhouse, rags soaked in kerosene, positioned near the old hay in the corner, with a long pull cord running through a knothole to the main house wall. A single tug and the building would go up fast and bright, enough to light the whole yard like noon. In the evenings he cooked supper and they talked. On the second evening, he took the Colt Lightning from the trunk where he had been keeping it and laid it on the table. He field stripped it and cleaned it with the deliberate, easy certainty of a man who has done it 10,000 times, and then he reassembled it and checked the action and set it on the table in front of Rena. "Pick it up," he said. She picked it up. "It's heavier than I thought. It's a .38. Carry it in both hands if you need to, at least until your arms remember the weight." He moved to stand behind her left shoulder. "Pointed at the far wall, not the corner, the middle of the wall." She pointed it at the middle of the wall. "Your right elbow is too high. Drop it. Now don't think about the gun. Think about the point on the wall you want to hit. The gun is just the thing between you and the point." She adjusted. Her elbow came down. "Better," Owen said. "Now, the thing nobody tells you about shooting is that the hardest part isn't aiming. It's the moment before you pull the trigger, when your body wants to flinch before the bang that hasn't happened yet. Your body tries to prepare for the noise. That flinch is what makes people miss from 10 feet away." He paused. "The way you beat it is breathing. Breathe in. Let half of it out. Hold what's left. Then squeeze. Don't pull. Squeeze. Like you're pressing your finger against something you don't want to startle." She tried it on the wall without a cartridge. Then again, he said. She did it again. One more time. On the fourth try her elbow stayed down, her breathing was even, and her hand was steady on the squeeze. "That's it," Owen said. "That's the thing." She set the gun down and turned to look at him. "If it comes to it," she said, "I won't miss." Owen looked at her for a moment. "No," he said. "I don't think you will." They came on the fourth evening. Owen had expected them the third, and when the third passed without incident, he had spent the night sitting in the dark kitchen with the back of his chair against the wall and the Colt in his lap, not sleeping, just waiting, the way he had learned to wait in years when waiting was what kept you alive. By the fourth evening, the waiting had settled into something quieter and heavier, and when the sound of hoofbeats came up the south road, he was already at the window. 4 of them. The Henry brothers rode together in front, exactly alike in the failing light, both on dark horses. Behind them came 2 more men Owen didn't know by name but knew by type, young, nervous-looking, the kind of riders who worked themselves into something hard by the time they arrived somewhere. Hired muscle for numbers, not for quality. No Crow Ashworth. Owen filed that away. Crow was holding back. Crow would be watching from somewhere or would come after, once the numbers had done their work. He went to Rena, who was in the kitchen. 4 riders, not Crow, South Road. She picked up the Colt and held it at her side. "You know what to do," Owen said. "Don't come out until you hear me say your name. If you hear Crow Ashworth's voice inside the house without hearing mine first, shoot through the door." "All right." He went out the back, moving low and fast in the gray dusk, cutting wide around the side of the house to get ahead of them, working through the scrub mesquite to the position he had chosen 2 days ago. He had scouted this from every angle. He knew where the shadows were and where they weren't, and he came to rest behind the broad base of a limestone outcropping at the edge of the dry wash with the Colt in his hand. He had not held a loaded pistol in 12 years. It felt exactly the same as he remembered. The weight of it, the way the grip settled into his palm as if it had been waiting there. He had expected it to feel different after all that time. He had hoped, perhaps, on some level, that it would feel strange, that the 12 years would have changed something fundamental enough that he would have to relearn the thing from the beginning. It did not feel strange. It felt like coming home to a house he had promised himself he was done living in. He breathed in. Let half of it out. The riders came down the south road toward the wash. The 2 Henry brothers were in front, moving at a confident trot. Confident enough that they were not watching the ground. The lead horse, Edmonds, hit the wire at the second stride into the wash descent. The sound was immediate and awful, a crash of iron and leather, and the high scream of a horse going down, and Edmund Henry went over the neck of his horse and hit the dirt of the wash floor and rolled twice. The second horse shied hard to the right, and Ira went sideways in the saddle and fought to keep his seat. The two men behind them pulled up hard, their horses spinning. Owen stood. "That's enough," he said, not loud. The wash carried his voice perfectly. Edmund Henry was on the ground. His horse had gone up fast, shaken, not badly hurt, but Edmund had hit hard and was moving slowly, shaking his head. Ira had his horse under control and had one hand on his pistol. "Don't," Owen said. Ira Henry looked at him for a long moment. In the failing light, Owen was little more than a shape above the lip of the wash, a dark outline with a gun. Ira was a professional, and professionals calculate odds, and something in the stillness of that shape above him was saying something he knew how to read. He took his hand off his pistol. "Here is what happens now," Owen said. "You help your brother up, you ride to Coldwater. You tell Augustus Pell that the woman on this ranch has a ledger, and that ledger is already on its way to the territorial marshal at Fort Supply." He paused. "And you tell Crow Ashworth that if he sets foot on this property, the same man who sent you back will send him home too. Permanently." He pulled the cord at his side. The bunkhouse went up. It was loud and sudden and enormous, a column of fire against the dark sky, bright enough that the horses screamed and skittered, and the two unnamed riders in the back wheeled and were gone down the south road at a full run, before the sound had finished echoing off the limestone bluff. Ira Henry had his horse under control by pure instinct, but his face was white. Owen looked at the two of them. "Go," he said. They went. He waited for Crow Ashworth. He had known Crow would not come with the others. Crow was too experienced for that. Crow would send the numbers first, wait to see what the numbers found, and then come himself. Owen had banked on that, had built the whole evening around it. He went back inside the house, moving quickly, and told Rena to move away from the windows. 20 minutes later, he heard a single set of hoofbeats coming up the east side of the property, not the south road. Crow Ashworth had come around. Owen had not expected that. He had expected the south road again. He moved through the dark house toward the front room, but he was a half-second behind Crow's thinking. And Crow Ashworth had been making his living at this for 6 years, and he was good at his work. The back door came in. Crow had Rena by the hair in the first second, a long-bladed knife at her throat, his body behind her, using her as a wall between himself and the doorway where Owen now stood. "Gun down," Crow said, in that soft conversational voice. Owen looked at him. He looked at Rena. Her face was very still. Her eyes were clear. His right hand was at his side out of the lamplight. She had the Colt in it. He had passed it to her through the doorway 2 minutes ago, against this contingency, telling her quietly to keep it out of sight, low at her hip, pointed at the floor. Owen held eye contact with Crow Ashworth. "You've got about 3 options," Owen said, keeping his voice measured, keeping Crow's eyes on his face. "You can let her go, which is the right one. You can use that knife, which would be the last thing you did. Or you can keep standing there, working out how to get out of this room." Crow's eyes moved just slightly to Rena's face. That was the mistake. Crow Ashworth looked at Rena Mott's face and saw what was in it, and by the time his brain sent the signal that she was not afraid, that the fear he had counted on was not there, it was too late. She brought the Colt up from her hip and fired once. The sound filled the room like a thunderclap. Crow Ashworth's knife hand opened. He fell back against the kitchen wall and slid down it slowly, and sat on the floor with an expression of pure surprise, and the knife was on the floor beside him. Rena stepped forward and kicked the knife away from his hand. She did not shake. Her elbow was down. Her breathing was even. Owen crossed the room and knelt and checked Crow Ashworth for what he needed to check for. Then he looked up at Rena. She was watching the door. "It's done," Owen said. The territorial marshal arrived from Fort Supply on the morning of the 6th day. His name was Elias Ward, and he came with 2 deputies and a warrant. He had not needed to be convinced. The ledger had gotten to him via Hep Burdine, who had ridden overnight after Owen sent him word, old as he was, because Hep Burdine had made Caleb Mott's water arrangements and had signed 3 of the entries himself and understood what was at stake. Marshal Ward had read the ledger in his office and understood immediately what it was and had come prepared. He found Augustus Pell at his freight office in Coldwater, eating breakfast off his china plates, with a Bible open on the desk and a glass of good whiskey beside it, looking out the window at the stockyards he owned. Pell looked up when Ward came through the door, and he looked at the warrant, and he looked at Ward's face, and then he looked out the window again for a long moment. "I'll want a lawyer," he said. "You'll get one," Ward said. In Guthrie, they put Pell on a horse and rode him out of Coldwater before noon. The Henry brothers had vanished during the night and were not there to see it. Edmund had a broken collarbone from the wire in the wash, and wherever they went together, which was always how it had been with them. The Cimarron Spring became what the ledger said it should always have been: a water source with open access, reasonably priced, available to any outfit that drove cattle through the strip. The territorial surveyor came out and posted notices, and Rena signed the papers that made it legal. She planted a kitchen garden south of the house that week, in the thin spring soil, because Caleb had always meant to, and they had never gotten around to it. Owen Mott stayed 8 days. On the morning of the 9th day, Rena woke before dawn to the sound of a horse being saddled in the yard, that quiet, purposeful sound of a man who is going somewhere and does not want to wake anyone, the sound of 1,000 partings on the frontier. She put on her coat and went to the yard in the dark blue cold of the Cimarron morning. Owen was tying the last strap on the saddle. He had Caleb's old saddle blanket, the faded Navajo one, rolled and tied behind his own. He had asked her permission for it the day before, and she had told him to take it. "You could stay," she said. "There's room for a hand." Owen said. "Where will you go?" He thought about that for a moment. "West," he said, "away from the name smoke. I've been trying that for a while. Takes a lot of country." He checked the cinch one more time, a habit. "You'll be all right here." "I know I will," she said. He put his foot in the stirrup and went up smoothly. And then he sat the horse in the gray cold and looked at the ranch, at the limestone bluff above it, and the dark grass running south toward the Cimarron, and the well house roof catching the first pale edge of dawn. "Caleb's debt is paid," he said. "Yours isn't mine to pay anymore." Rena looked up at him. "You paid it anyway," she said. Owen turned the gray horse south. She watched him until he went over the ridge and the Cimarron Strip took him back. The way it takes everything sooner or later, the dust in the wood sky, swallowing the shape of him, until there was nothing on the ridge but early light and the dry rasp of grass moving in the morning wind. Now, folks, I have been an old man sitting by this dying fire for a long time, and I have told a lot of stories, and I have been told a lot of stories, and the ones that stay with me are not always the ones you'd expect. This one has stayed, not because of Owen Mott, though Owen Mott was a particular kind of man that the frontier made and the frontier used up, and the frontier never quite understood what it had in its hands. Not because of the wire in the wash, or the fire in the bunkhouse, or the clean single shot Rena Mott put into Crow Ashworth in her own kitchen without so much as a tremor in her elbow. This one has stayed because of what Hep Burdine did. Hep Burdine was 60 years old and had bad knees and a whiskey habit and no stake in any of this. He rode overnight on bad roads to deliver a ledger to a marshal, because he had known for 3 weeks what Augustus Pell had done, and he had been looking at the floor about it. And then he stopped looking at the floor. The real darkness in any town is never just the man with the knife at someone's throat. Every bad man I ever heard of operated in plain daylight, in full view with everyone around him choosing to look somewhere else. Crow Ashworth rode into that yard in broad daylight. Pell sent his message in a polite letter. The Henry brothers sat their horses on the ridge and watched a widow dig a grave, and nobody in Coldwater said a word about it. The darkness isn't the gun. The darkness is the floor everyone is staring at. Owen Mott understood that. He had spent 12 years staring at his own floor, at the trunk with the gun in it, at the reasons not to ride. It was Caleb's death that made him stop. It was Rena Mott, steady as stone in a kitchen doorway with a Colt and an even breath, that made him understand what he had been keeping himself from. You can bury a name, you can bury a gun. You can ride 300 miles in the wrong direction and tell yourself you're done. But what you carry is what you carry. Keep your powder dry, partner, and your soul honest until our trails cross again.